Good morning, and welcome to today's webinar on the ways cuts to public education threaten student success, hosted by the Center for American Progress. Before we begin, I would like to share that live closed captioning is available using the Closed Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. This webinar will be recorded and available on CAP's website following the conclusion of the event. My name is Paige Shoemaker-DeMio, and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst on CAP's K-12 Education Policy team. Today's webinar is a part of a series examining the challenges parents, educators, and students face as they prepare for the new school year and providing state and local stakeholders with solutions to mitigate harm. From a changing federal role in public education to federal funding cuts and increased costs for back-to-school basics, public schools are left with more questions than answers as they start the new school year. Today, we are joined by an esteemed panel moderated by Dr. Wiade James, CAP's Senior Director of K-12 Education Policy, to assess how federal actions are affecting schools' ability to have a strong start to the academic year, what state and district leaders can do to help mitigate these effects, and what is expected to come next. Our panelists will be taking questions following their conversation, so please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. With that, I'll hand it over to Dr. James to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. I am pleased to welcome an esteemed panel of experts to talk about this issue around federal funding cuts and the impact on local schools and local communities. Joining us today is Chase Christensen, who serves as the superintendent of Sheridan County School District in Claremont, Wyoming, where he also leads as the principal of the K-12 school. Chase is a dedicated public education advocate. He has spent his career championing rural schools and the students they serve. With over a decade of school leadership experience, he has become known for his commitment to equity, student opportunity, and the belief that strong schools build stronger communities. Chase was named the Wyoming Association of Secondary School Principals Principal of the Year in 2024, and is also the co-founder of the Principal Apprentice Program, which develops future leaders across Wyoming. Rooted in his rural values and inspired by the power of public service, Chase continues to work tirelessly to ensure that every student in his district has access to high-quality learning and supportive relationships and a hopeful path forward. Also joining us is Michael DiNapoli Jr. Michael DiNapoli serves as Director of Federal Policy for the Learning Policy Institute. DiNapoli has more than a decade of experience working in public education as a classroom teacher in New York City, as well as a policy advisor on Capitol Hill and a legislative affairs staffer for the New York City Department of Education. In New York City, Michael began his career in the classroom and later served as Director of City and Federal Legislative Affairs for the city's Department of Education. During nearly 8 years of experience on Capitol Hill, he had the honor of working on education policy for two student members of the Senate Health Committee. As a legislative aid staffer for Senator Tammy Baldwin, he helped advance her education priorities in the most recent reauthorization of ESEA. As the lead education staffer for Senator Bernie Sanders, DiNapoli served as the point on all education policy matters for the senator in his role as ranking member on the Senate Budget Committee and as a senior member on the Senate Health Committee. In this role, DiNapoli's signature accomplishment included drafting the second iteration of the senator's plan to make public colleges tuition and fee-free. Also joining us today is CAP's in-house resident expert on federal budget policy, Bobby Kogan. He works to ensure that federal budget prioritizes policies that help the most vulnerable people. He is an expert in federal budget issues, including aggregate spending, revenues, interest, deficits, and debt. He is also an expert in congressional budget reconciliation process, as well as in budget concepts and budget scorekeeping. Prior to joining CAP, Kogan served in the Biden-Harris White House as advisor to the director of the Office of Management Budget, where he assisted with the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the president's budget requests and budget concepts. Before the administration, Kogan joined the Biden-Harris transition team in August of 2020 as policy advisor and budget coordinator. Prior to that, he served on the Democratic staff of the U.S. Senate Committee on the Budget under Senator Patty Murray, and Senator Bernie Sanders as the chief mathematician and the head of budget analysis, budget concepts, and budget scorekeeping. His work has been cited many times in the New York Times, as well as Washington Post and other publications. Last but not least, we are joined by Yasmina White. Yasmina White is a devoted mother of 2 young daughters, ages 11 and 5, and a passionate advocate for effective, sustainable, and well-funded early childhood and public education. Committed to community empowerment in Duval County, Yasmina brings years of hands-on experience as a community volunteer. She has become a trusted voice for families and students, especially in helping them navigate the complexities of the local education system. Her local impact has grown swiftly, especially through her creation of an accessible information hub for families in Duval County. At the state level, Yasmina has collaborated with congressional leaders on policies impacting Floridians' everyday lives, and nationally, she has engaged with the Biden administration's Gender Policy Council, addressing the structural barriers faced by women and girls. She also serves on the Florida Steering Committee as a parent leader with Moms Rising, a national grassroots organization fighting for family economic security. Thanks to our amazing panel for joining us this morning. We're very excited to start this conversation with you all. As Paige mentioned earlier, the chat will be open for questions, so we encourage our audience members to add any questions they may have for our panelists in the chat as we go through our discussion today. So I'm going to begin with Bobby Kogan, our in-house budget expert, with a question about where we are. In the last 6 months, we've seen the administration has illegally frozen several K-12 education funds. Some of that funding has been released, with other portions still remain unavailable. There have also been reports that the White House is considering requesting some funds be rescinded, and potentially through a pocket rescission. So can you explain the various methods through which the White House has or is considering denying states, local governments, and school districts federal education dollars?
Sure. Thanks, Riade, and thanks everyone for joining us. So as Riade says, the White House has been illegally pausing funds since day one. In some cases for education, I think, maybe like week 2 or something crazy like that. But there are kind of a couple different paths that the administration has been taking. One is something called impoundments. An impoundment is any action or inaction. It's like the first law of robotics. It's any action or inaction that either temporarily or permanently prevents money from either being obligated or spent. Right? Basically, when Congress passes a law and it's signed into law and the president enacts it saying spend money to do X, you have to do it. You can't spend more than you got. You can't spend less than you got. If they give you $100 million to fund some school activity, you can't be like, well, but I kind of hate it, so I'm only going to do 25 million of that, right? You could veto it, or we're going to get to rescissions. If you have, if along the way you ask Congress says, well, we actually don't need all of that, so we're going to pare some of it back. That's fine, but you can't just not spend it. But this administration has been doing that. So you've heard and you'll hear more about lots of frozen funds. All of those pauses along the way are illegal. And what's kind of so spooky is that most money has what's called a period of availability. You only have so long to use it. Lots of these funds you have only 1 year. And so while it is illegal to not use the money, if you make it to the end of the period of availability and you have illegally not used it, then that money is no longer available. If there's an ongoing suit, there's precedent about maybe kind of effectively extending the period of availability. But short of an ongoing litigation, that money is just gone if you wait out its time period illegally. So that's one thing it's been doing. Rescissions, as I kind of said before, are when Congress comes in and says, we made a mistake. We didn't want to give that much money. We're going to pare back some of the unobligated money. So we saw this recently, not in the education space, but in Corporation for Public Broadcasting and a lot of the overseas aid. USAID just got ravaged. That was with the rescissions package that went through. Rescissions are normal. They happen every year. What's so spooky is for the first time ever, they did a filibuster-proof way of getting rescissions. And so what this means is that because Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, just with the majority they have, they're able to pare back a lot of funding. And so all of a sudden, that puts this stuff in play in a pretty real way that maybe, that means that they could do it even without any bipartisan support. That gets us to pocket rescissions, which is not actually a rescission, but is called pocket rescissions nonetheless. That's kind of a method through which the administration wants to wait out. I said in the beginning that there was this period of availability that money is only able to be used in a certain time period. Pocket rescission is an illegal attempt, a specific illegal attempt to kind of wait out that final period. You could do it through a different way. You could just wait it out. But this pocket rescission, the White House claims that it adds kind of legal legitimacy to what they're doing. So they're toying with doing that. If they send up a pocket rescission request today, tomorrow, something crazy like that, that would be a method through which they'd try to wait it out. End of the fiscal year is September 30th. And so you could, theoretically, they say, oh, well, we'll get to pause the money for these next 45 days, but they wrongfully claim that the law lets them do, and then all of a sudden they get to the end and the money would be gone. So this is all a long way of saying that the White House has been pausing stuff. There are court cases going on. Obviously, some of the money, which people get to, has been released. Other bits of the money hasn't been released. If you wait it out or you do a pocket rescission, that money could then kind of go away for forever. And then there's this other path, this rescission path, as I say, where you could formally, legally rescind it. That's scary, but it's legal. It's just a political battle. Back to you, Iade.
Great. Thanks so much, Bobby, for that overview and really clarifying for us that many of these pauses are indeed illegal. So I want to move on to digging a little deeper into the K-12 impoundment that we've seen over the last several months. Obviously, Bobby noted, similar strategies and methods have been employed for USAID and public broadcasting and NPR. But when it comes to K-12, Michael, this question will be for you. Which federal K-12 grants and programs have been most affected by the recent freeze and withholdings, and what funding has been released, what remains frozen, and which programs are currently impacted?
Sure. Thanks, Wiade. And I'll talk about the funds that were frozen and released first, and then I'll talk about some funds that have been remain canceled and unavailable. So as Bobby touched on, Congress passes a bill, the funding bill, President signs it into law. That's what happened for fiscal year 25, which is the fiscal year we're in. That bill was passed in March in a bipartisan fashion. Funding is supposed to start flowing to states by July 1st, as it has every other year. So on June 30th, this administration announced that it was freezing $7 billion worth of formula grant funding that goes directly to states. And this was funding frozen across 6 programs, all authorized through bipartisan laws that Congress had passed. And the field was shocked. Alabama Superintendent Aaron Mackey summed it up quite nicely. He said, quote, "None of us were expecting this." And the titles that were frozen include Title I-C of ECA, the Migrant Education Program, which helps support migratory students achieve and graduate high school. Title II-A, the Supporting Effective Instruction Program, which helps fund high-quality preparation and professional development for teachers, as well as class size reduction in the earlier grades. Title III-A of ESEA, the English Language Acquisition Program, which helps English language learners achieve English language mastery, as well as achieve in core academic subjects. There's the Title IV-A Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant Program, which funds well-rounded education like STEM and the arts and music, helps teachers train on the effective use of technology in school, as well as helps schools purchase technology devices, and also efforts to keep students safe and healthy. There was the Title IV-B 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which funds summer school, after school, before school, helps schools extend their day if they like. And then the Adult Basic Literacy and Education State Grants, which helps adult learners achieve as well. And so there was an outcry from the field, and after nearly a month, on July 25th, the administration announced that it would release all the funding that it was withholding. However, I do want to note that the administration put additional requirements on states that did not exist beforehand. And I also want to zoom in on that there was damage in the delay. Summer programs had to abruptly stop. Planned after-school programming were canceled. Schools had to put recruiting and hiring decisions on hold as the school year rapidly approached. So not having these funds caused alone for just a small period of time caused a lot of damage. And then there's the funds that are still unavailable. Early on in the administration, as Bobby had mentioned, the administration canceled a number of grant programs. In February, they canceled a reported $600 million worth of funds that are designed, competitive grant program funds that are designed to help provide high quality preparation for teachers, as well as ongoing professional development for those in the field. There was teachers that were preparing to teach who got scholarships that were abruptly ended. And so there is ongoing litigation, and unfortunately, for many of these funds, the fiscal year is coming to an end, and that money may just return to the Treasury, and we have, nothing to show for it. In April, the administration also canceled $1 billion worth of mental health grants to schools that were part of the bipartisan 2022 gun safety bill. Schools are in the process of reapplying for these funds now, and there's no guarantee that folks who had the funds that won them through a competitive process will get them again. And then just last week, there's rumors that the administration is going to cancel funding for programs under Part D of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And this funds programs that help strengthen services for students with disabilities, ranging from special education, teacher preparation, and professional development to supports that help parents. So this is not a comprehensive list of everything that's still withheld, but I think it will give you a good oversight of the things that are currently not available.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that overview, and really appreciate the research that you and your colleagues at LPI have done on this very issue to give a state-by-state breakdown of how much funds are being lost in each of these regions and how it's impacting local communities. So that is a nice transition to hearing from Superintendent Christensen from Wyoming to hear about what's happening on the ground and how your local district is being impacted. So how has Wyoming, your particular district specifically, been impacted by the delays or some of these cancellation to K-12 federal funding? Can you give us some specific examples of how it has affected hiring, particularly given the freezes for some of the teacher prep grants? How it has affected resources or academic programming within your district?
Thank you, Wyatt. And I'd just like to build off of Michael's comment he made there with regard to the disruptions in funding. And while all of the funding that was spelled out from the federal government to my district specifically, and I think more largely to the districts across Wyoming, has been released, it's still the few weeks that we were under the assumption or having to deal with the fact that it may not be released really did disrupt public education. We use a extremely fiscally responsible budgeting process that we begin early in the or late in the fall each year to budget for the following fiscal year. And through that, we include we same price the title grants into our budget. So we know who we can afford to hire, who we can have on staff, and what programming we're going to be able to provide our students. My district specifically, we had that planned in. We had Title II committed to some contracts with a consultant to come in and help my teachers teach math. We adopted a new curriculum last year, so that those dollars are already committed to a contract to have them come in and better implement that curriculum for my students. The Title IV, we're already committed to a contract that we have with a local jiu-jitsu gym that comes out every other Monday and teaches self-defense to my students. And these are programs that we have found great value, my community values, that may not be able to occur if we don't have that general funding from the state. and from the federal government. I would like to point out, I mean, federal dollars equate to about 7% of education dollars at the K-12 level across the country. So it doesn't seem like it's that big of a hit, but across districts and within my district, staffing costs are somewhere between 80 and 88%. So there's very little money to work with that is not people. So what this ends up meaning is if dollars are cut, it's going to be people that are cut. It's going to be jobs that are lost. It's going to be less support in the classroom for students on the ground. With the release of funds, I was able to rebound back and recommit to the projects that we had planned. But as Michael pointed out earlier, if districts had to pause hiring processes or even go so far as to cancel contracts with people they had already hired, those aren't things that you can just turn around on a dime. Education is a space where we don't have a ton of applicants for every job. And if we remove one person from a position, it's a good chance they're going to get a job elsewhere and not be available the next day when we call and say, oh yeah, we do still need you. So those disruptions, I think, were the biggest issue right now. Going forward, I think the worry is that this was just a flag, just an indication that this title funding may go away in future budgets. And I think where we're at with federal funding for education, it basically establishes a floor. And I think the federal government has done a good job over the last 40 years of establishing a floor for all students and gradually raising that floor so that we're improving the quality of public education, which is at its highest level ever right now. We're graduating students that are better prepared and contributing to our economy in a fantastic way. So I think that's the worry going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that overview and also giving us some insight into the budgeting process for districts, right? Like this happened starting in the fall of the academic year and having to go back and all of a sudden, change what you budgeted for. That can be pretty challenging for districts. So I want to hear a bit from, the parent perspective. Obviously, we've heard from our national advocates and researchers and the superintendent, but Yasmina, as a parent, tell us how, these actions to eliminate or significantly reduce K-12 federal funding, how is that impacting families? And then what concerns do you have or what are you hearing from other parents about how these changes may be impacting their children's education?
So as a mom of two daughters, one that is 5 going into kindergarten and another that is 11 who just started her first year of middle school in 6th grade, I'm so excited for their journey, but I also carry a huge pit in my stomach as it relates to the future of public education, as I can imagine so many other families feel. In Florida, public schools have been a quiet target for years, and now we're starting to see public schools across the nation loudly being impacted by the changes. Dismantle the critical funding, like other panelists have stated, gutting civil rights protections, and defund the very federal programs that many families rely on. The fear and uncertainty this creates in communities like mine is very real. I know my children will be okay, but I worry about the children in other communities that do not have the same support that my family has, and how I'm able to take them to schools outside of their neighborhood school. So many families are worried about various issues related to overcrowded classrooms, exhausted teachers, cuts to tutoring and mental health support, losing access to after school and summer programs that keeps children safe while parents work. Parents of children with disabilities are terrified about who will enforce their children's rights to an equal education if protections disappear. And families worry about losing school-based services like speech or occupational therapy. We need to always remember that a teacher's teaching environment is a student's learning environment, and these policies decisions are showing up in the classroom.
Thank you for that, Yasmina, and for sharing with us what a lot of families are experiencing at this moment as they're back to school and really looking at the uncertainty of funding for their classrooms and for schools. So I want to talk a bit more about the the president's proposed budget for education, because a lot of the programs that were named in Michael's response and in terms of K-12 education, those programs have been eliminated in the president's proposed budget. But let's talk about the process, the next step, right? So, Bobby, the president's budget includes major cuts to education for FY26. What happens next in the budget approval process, and how might Congress respond?
Sure. So this fiscal year is federal fiscal year is coming to an end September 30th. If there is no funding at that point, government we have a government shutdown. Most likely, usually what happens is we do what's called a CR, or a continuing resolution, for some number of months that usually just says, do exactly what we did last year, the exact same way for the time being while we figure stuff out. What they are trying to figure out is how much they're going to deviate from last year. Riade, as you said, president called for severe cuts in some areas, complete eliminations of different programs. It kind of depends on what we're looking at. But basically to totally and radically transform the way the federal government is interacting with state and local education. The House and the Senate are even though they're both Republican, are in completely different places. The Senate marked up its bill, and it basically preserves education the way that we've seen it. It was a major bipartisan thing. It hasn't gone before the full chamber, but they passed it through committee 26-3, right? So there was broad agreement among Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans to continue to fund federal education. The House is a different story. The House, the president called for, this number is going to lack context, but just trust me, it's really big. $163 billion cuts to what's called non-defense discretionary. That's where this part of the budget lives. It's out of about-ish 775-ish billion, so a pretty heavy amount of it. The House wanted to write its overall spending to the president's target and kind of mess with the details under the hood. But they've given up. It was too difficult for them. They pulled their own bill because they couldn't figure out how to get cuts that deep. So they are standstill. They don't know what to do. They are trying to do enormous cuts, but they've given up on kind of finding the votes for that. So the most likely thing that we're looking at now is maybe something that looks like what we did last year, or this year, which is a full year CR, which just preserves what we've seen this year. That's good insofar as we don't get the enormous cuts the president was asking for, but it's really bad insofar as that means that it doesn't keep up with the growth of the student population. It doesn't keep up with inflation costs, right? It doesn't, there's no additional dollars, and that means we're falling further and further and further behind. So as I said, the good news is we will see soon that probably the president's request will be rejected, but the bad news is that even maintaining the status quo of this has us falling further behind, and schools struggling and stretching their dollars more and more, and local school districts really struggling to maintain services.
Great. Thanks, Bobby. Just a reminder to our audience, we're a little halfway through our questions for our panelists, so please continue to add your questions to the chat because we do want to get to as many of your questions as we can, okay? All right, so I want to dig a little deeper into the FY26 budget and the K-12 grants that are being eliminated. So this question for Michael, the budget consolidates 18 K-12 grant programs into a block grant known as the K-12 Simplified Funding Program, which is funded at $4.5 billion less than the total current funding of these programs combined. It would also completely eliminate funding for a number of other programs, pushing the total cut well over $4.5 billion. So what is block granting, and how could it affect the academic services students receive? And what are your biggest concerns and your greatest hopes concerning the proposed budget? Which programs do you think are most at risk, and which might be preserved or strengthened?
Thank you, Riade. So Block granting is the approach of rolling many different programs that have specific important educational purposes into one program. Now, the administration's approach to block granting is both a block and a cut, a very large cut. So as you mentioned, the proposed simplified funding program would roll 18 competitive and formula grant programs worth $6.5 billion and then funding them at $2 billion. So a $4.5 billion cut to do more with less. And these programs that they're cutting range from ensuring that students experiencing homelessness have dedicated support to aiding the recruiting, hiring, and retention of high-quality teachers, well-rounded education, and the like. And so on top of this block granting, the administration also proposes completely eliminating funding for 9 other K through 12 education programs worth nearly $2 billion. So putting the cuts from the block granting and the complete elimination of other programs, this would leave K through 12 schools, if enacted, with nearly $6.5 billion fewer dollars in fiscal year 26 than in the current fiscal year. And if we think about this in actual impacts to communities, this $6.5 billion come at a time when research shows us that students are about a half a grade level behind pre-pandemic levels in math and reading achievement. So, for example, the elimination and the block granting of Title IIA, the Supporting Effective Instruction Program, which provides over $2 billion in funding for high quality educator preparation and professional development, could crimp the pipeline into teaching and leave teachers and principals and other instructional support staff with less access to professional development in core academic subjects. If we think about this another way, we know that today the ratio of student to school-based mental health professionals is completely out of balance. For example, there's about 1 school psychologist to every 1,100 students. And the Title IVA of ESEA, the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant Program, helps provide funding for schools to provide health supports, including mental health supports for students. So there would be a loss there. We also know that 4.9 million English language learners, 770,000 of which are students with disabilities, are in schools that receive Title IIIA funds, the English Language Acquisition Program, which is designed to help these students master English and also be successful in other academic subjects, which the administration proposes to completely eliminate. So when it comes to the programs I think may be most at risk, I think it's the nearly 30 programs that either are proposed to be block granted or completely eliminated. And as Bobby shared, the president's budget is a proposal. And so Congress needs to craft the funding bills, which the president can sign and veto. And as Bobby shared, the Senate Appropriations Committee, which is in charge of funding for education and other funding across the government, has a bipartisan bill that largely maintains current funding levels, which is great. However, the House has yet to act. And last year, the farthest the House got with their bill was that the Appropriations Committee on the House side passed their bill, and it had about $28 billion worth of cuts. So we could see similar cuts coming our way when the House returns in August. Back to you, Iade.
Thanks, Michael. And I think you touched on it, like these cuts are affecting numerous aspects of the K-12 profession, right? Beyond teachers, we'll talk about mental health supports for students. We're talking about technology and all of the things that students need to thrive. So would love to hear from Superintendent Chase about what steps has your state or district taken to offset the current and potential loss of federal education funding? And I think, as we're speaking currently, it's really about K-12 funding, but there are also some larger cuts that districts and states are grappling with, right? Medicaid cuts and SNAP cuts also impact students. And we know the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that has been passed will also have those effects on state budgets that are going to be strained. So what can states do, districts do to help to mitigate some of these effects and cuts at the federal level?
Thanks, Beata. I think the only rational response to a uncertain funding stream is to not budget it into your spending. And I think that, immediately when the holdbacks came, the message came in July, my business manager called me and he said, "Hey, I'm going to take this out of our budget. You need to figure out what that looks like for the year with regard to moving forward." So with federal spending and with federal dollars right now, I think that's a position that most districts across the country are finding themselves in, is looking at, how are we going to accomplish the goals of education, which is to provide a safe, secure, good learning environment for all students without those dollars that come from the federal government. And earlier, I think, we are all positioned in a spot where we can do that for some kids every single day. The federal dollars are typically there to step in and make sure that the students that are of the least well off are receiving the same level of education and the same level of supports that every student does otherwise. And you make a good point. When we start to strip out not only those education dollars that are there to provide those supports within the education realm, but we're reducing Medicaid, we're reducing other benefits to families, it just exacerbates the problem for the same kids. And when we have 1, 2, 3, 4 hits, and it's happening at the family, it's happening for our nonprofits, it's happening within our partners that are often able to help us with funding for individual students, because they also aren't getting the donations that they typically have at this point. It just continues to roll that education's in a tough spot. On the flip side of that, educators are tenacious in how they approach their job. I think from the district level on down to the teacher in the classroom, it's going to continue to be a hit. But my hope is that every day when a teacher walks into their classroom, the noise up and above is not going to be in their mind, and they're going to be doing their best job for their kids. I firmly believe that our educators do a fantastic job in the classroom for our kids every single day, and they're going to continue to do that. The job is an extremely difficult one, where Michael speaks to the point of teacher prep programs and support for professional development. It's not going to be an immediate impact that we see within education. Like tomorrow, the education is going to be just as great as it was yesterday. But 3 years from now, when we've seen the degradation of our teacher prep programs, 5 years from now, when my new teachers haven't got the support that my new teachers were getting with the professional development that I'm able to bring into the district, we're just going to see a slow erosion of the ability to provide the same public education for every single kid. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think you brought up a good point about the tenacity of teachers and, being there to do the jobs that they're called to do, essentially, because it is a call and teaching is. So I want to hear from Yasmina about, what are some non-monetary things, right? No cost supports that schools and school districts can do to support students and families right now. The superintendent referenced the stripping of social safety nets and programs for families. What can schools and districts be doing to help to support families?
Yes, I want to piggyback off of Chase immediately in terms of thanking our teachers, principals, superintendents, and district leaders for the phenomenal work they do in our school districts amidst all the chaos and everything that's going on with public education. So with that being said, one of the biggest non-monetary strategies is for school board members and district leaders to continue to mobilize parents, teachers, and students to advocate for funding and policy changes at the local and state level, including federal. Be transparent in what is going on and how it is impacting families with real and direct examples. Keep it neutral. There are so many parents who cannot mentally connect that public education has become highly politicized. Therefore, they begin to pull back and disengage. Building coalitions with other districts within your state to cohesively push for systematic changes is what this is going to take. I always say the heart and souls of our schools are PTA and our SAC and parent organizations. And that is what's going to help propel and keep public education alive in our country.
Thanks, Yamina. So I want to talk a little bit about the cuts to the federal agency, right, the Department of Education, because we've been discussing cuts to, grant programs, which is important, but in order for states and local districts to get the technical assistance, the support, and the guidance they need, we need a well-staffed Department of Education. And the administration has proposed to eliminate the department and recently cut the workforce in half, right? So this question is for Michael and the administration's plan to dismantle the department. How will the cuts to the federal government impact the department's ability to provide guidance and oversight to K-12 state and local education agencies? And if you can also just talk a little bit about some of the red tape that's being imposed, right? The administration has vowed to eliminate red tape, but you mentioned in your previous response that the funding rather that's been dispersed now is coming with new conditions. So there's additional red tape that's being imposed on local districts. So how will that impact school districts, and how would it impact the department's ability to provide that oversight and guidance to districts and states?
Sure. I think we're going to see the impacts in many ways, from basic transparency to the enforcement of key civil rights protections for students. And one of the first areas of cuts to the Department of Education was the Institute for Education Sciences, which is the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. It's been nearly completely decimated, which will impact policy, practice, and basic information on educational opportunities. So, for example, within IES, the National Center for Education Statistics is the statistical center for IES, and it is reported to have shrunk from over 90 staff to 3. And NCS tracks basic information on things like teacher workforce, school finance, school safety, and more. And it's also charged with administering the National Assessment for Educational Progress, also known as the Nation's Report Card, which gives us basic information on how students are performing across the states academically. So this is a matter of basic transparency for parents, students, communities, et cetera, on how students are doing, and also what are the research-based practices that could be put into place to help students succeed and teachers teach better, et cetera. There's also the Office of Civil Rights at Ed, or OCR, and it's been particularly hard hit. In January, it had 12 regional offices across the country, and 7 of those have been closed. The administration is also in the middle of a court battle in an attempt to cut staff there, to attempt to cut about 243 staffers from around 560. And OCR is in charge of enforcing civil rights through investigations, hearing complaints. And if there's fewer people to do that, there's going to be fewer folks that have claims of discrimination when it comes to education investigated. And then also there's the cancellation of the regional education laboratories, which help states and school districts in their efforts to implement research-based practices, be it how to teach reading better, how to prepare teachers more effectively, et cetera. And this is currently caught up in a court battle. So these are real impacts that are going to affect communities. And then, as you mentioned, there's been new requirements put on states to access funding that has long been available to them, which creates additional burdens for the state, but also opens new legal questions that weren't around beforehand, which also creates further uncertainty and further burdens.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for naming the cuts to OCR. I think that's critical. Last fiscal year, the agency received over 22,000 civil rights complaints, which is the highest in its history. But we're losing attorneys and investigators and closing regional centers for OCR, which is going to make it more difficult for families to address those file discrimination complaints and actually get some resolution. So I appreciate you naming that. I want to now just pivot to Chase to hear a little bit about how these cuts at the Department of Education, the staffing cuts, how will that impact your district or local districts? Thinking about the support, what support do you expect to lose as a result of these staffing changes?
Throughout any given year, a single district doesn't have too much interaction with the federal Department of Education. Typically, that layer is done through our state department, and the support's provided to the State Department, which then flows through to us. Michael pointed out two areas where I think that breaks through, and one of those was OCR. And again, we spoke earlier to the point where federal dollars are often pointing to areas where students need the most support. And OCR, while I've been involved in some OCR complaints in the past, and I can't say that it's a process that I would like to ever be a part of again, it definitely provides students and their families an avenue to make sure that they are receiving what's promised to them in their education. And I would never want to see that taken away. The other avenue of support that the federal government is able to provide, and Michael pointed out, was through IES. And my teachers do take the IES guides that are published on any given area, and I have them read those when we're planning on how to improve our programming. How do we look at what curriculum we're going to use next? The IES guides inform consultants. They inform the people that we bring in to provide professional development. And this is the level of where our federal government truly is doing the basic research in what's best in education. And so often we find, even with the cuts right now that we're looking at in terms of grants to higher ed institutions, it's the basic research that helps move us along. And we always would like to think that the people that are coming out with the specific strategy that's going to be implemented by a teacher in a classroom is the impact point. But all of that is built upon the IES guides that are released from the government. We rely on NAEP scores to do planning and to compare and think about how well we're doing within our education system right now. Certainly in Wyoming, when I go to advocate to our state legislature, I'm using data from IES, from NAEP, from our Department of Ed. And the loss of good data leads to us making decisions that are not based on data and are often based on something that may not reach the level of where we could call it maybe a good decision. So I think the biggest impact that we're going to see specifically at the district level with the loss of federal funding is truly over the long term, if IES is not continuing to do that basic level research, we're not going to be able to continue to innovate the way that we have.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more with that, the importance of data collection and research at the federal level. So let's now close with our final question for our panel. And then we have a list of great audience questions we want to jump into. So the final question is for Yasmina. If you could send one message to a policymaker about the current state of education funding and what they should do, what would that message be?
It would really be emphasizing that public education is the greatest equalizer of our country, and that every child in America, no matter their color, their disability, the language they speak, or where they live in America, deserves equal access to a high quality, well-funded education in this country. Enough with the chaos, harm, and uncertainty. We need lawmakers to stand up for our kids and our families and protect the federal funding our schools rely on.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you. And the first audience question is actually for you, Yasmina. So please keep your mic on. We have a question from a CNN reporter. Thank you for this question. The question is, outside of politics and President Trump, what do you see as the biggest change this coming school year compared to past years? Is it the rise of AI, phone-free schools, rise in costs, science of reading, something else? What do you see as the biggest change this coming school year?
I think the biggest change is the fact that all of this is happening at once and how unprepared our schools often are to manage everything that's happening at once. Yes, AI is transforming classrooms and how students learn, but at the same time, districts are experimenting with phone-free schools, rolling out the science of reading and trying to address skyrocketing costs while also facing a youth mental health crisis and chronic absenteeism. The common thread is this: schools are being asked to adapt to rapid change while still underfunded, still understaffed, and consistently under political attack. For families like mine, what feels like a difference this year isn't just one trend, it's the pace of change.
Great. Thanks, Yasmina. We have a question about IDEA. So I'm going to pose this question, and whoever wants to take it, feel free to unmute or raise your hand. So IDEA has never been fully funded by Congress over the last 50 years to the levels promised when it was passed in 1975. What do you think will happen to IDEA under this administration? Why has funding lagged for 50 years? And what can be done to get Congress to fully fund their commitment?
I'm happy to jump in.
You go, Michael. You go, Michael.
Yeah. Well, the president's budget for this year would roll a number of IDEA programs that are not the state program and the preschool program into the state program. And it would keep that funding at current levels. Obviously, if you keep funding at current levels, that's not an increase. That's not the 40% that was promised when the law was passed. And also, the particular programs that are being rolled together are very important. There is no guarantee that if that funding that supports the preparation of special educators in IDA Part D will continue if it's rolled into the state program. There's not a guarantee that parent information centers or technical assistance will continue to exist in the same way. So those programs are very essential to helping ensure that students with disabilities have equal opportunity and access to a free and appropriate education. And of course, the budget does not include a proposal to fully fund IDEA, as has been promised. And I guess, Congress, of course, is on the hook here too, as they craft appropriations bills as well.
Thanks, Michael. Bobby, you want to add on to that?
No, Michael's great. Trust him always.
All right, sounds good. The third question is about ESEA waivers. So you all may know that on July 29th, the department issued a Dear Colleague letter, essentially inviting states to submit waiver requests. So how will this letter on waivers for ESEA requirements, what will that mean for federal funding for schools?
I can try that one out.
Yeah.
In conversation with our State Department, I think that right now states are being encouraged to submit waivers. And honestly, it feels like it's kind of, for lack of a better term, Wild West with regard to how we're going to apply. And I think it feels like a move that says we're going to start to lift some of the requirements. And I think the follow on to that is if we don't have the requirement to meet, then why do we need to have the funding? And it's, I haven't heard that yet. I think certainly other panelists may be able to weigh in there, but certainly it's an exciting process when you start to think about, well, there's this test that we've had to take because of the federal government for so long, and maybe we don't have to do that, but we know that the sign-offs that we have to do every year when we apply for grants and the tests that our students take, the data that's collected from that is informing the federal programming. And without some level of requirements, we can't expect that funding exists. And while the waivers open a door, I think on the same end, if we don't have any requirements, is the funding going to be maintained?
Oh, well said. Anyone else wants to chime in on that? No? All right. So we have another question. Yasmina, I think this might be a good question for you to take on, given your role as a parent leader at Moms Rising. So how can educators, families, and communities advocate for fair and sustained investment in public education? What advice would you give to students and to school districts who want to push back against these cuts and still build a future in policy?
So I would say What's worked in my experience is just educating and learning yourself how the policies affect us, how the systems work, how they work from the federal, state, and local levels, and being a voice to amplify that to people who don't know. There's so many people who do not understand the ambiguity of the public school system. I created Duval School News here in Jacksonville, Florida, that has gained over 2,000, almost 2,000 followers in the last year. And it's a hub of resource and information, of trusted information that I gather and break it down in lamest terms so that the community understands what is going on. People are more engaged and more involved now in Duval County than they've ever been related to public school education. And we have to start somewhere, and getting people to understand how these systems work is always going to be number one.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for underscoring the importance of educating ourselves to be empowered. So the last question I think would be appropriate for Superintendent Christensen. So I'm going to throw this one over to you. What is the status and impact of the COVID era ESSER funding coming to an end? So the department rescinded ESSER funds and claiming that the pandemic was over, although those funds were already authorized for states to use by the spending deadline, which was next year. Do we know the year-over-year impact of rescinding that funds? What parts of school budgets are likely to be most impacted?
Within Wyoming, our state did not apply for the waiver for extension in terms of the spend down for ESSER funds. So our spend down period ended in December last year. So I mean, I guess we were lucky in that, right? Because we were able to spend all of our dollars before the rescission took place. I know that those ESSER funds were being especially used in areas that we saw. Michael pointed out that we're still probably a half year behind in a lot of our grade levels with regard to where student performance is. And so often we find that that's in literacy and in math. And I know many districts across the country were using that money to hire literacy interventionists, math tutors, everything for the students, and working to get back to a point where we're at grade level. I think that that's work that our teachers are going to have to take on, which just means that we're going to continue to overwork an already taxed workforce in terms of them getting things back to where they know they should be so that students are performing at level. The dollars were there, and certainly when those rescissions took place, we saw people lose jobs. And it's, families aren't able to plan on that. Schools aren't able to plan on that. So I think the whole thing, it just reaches back to we are able to operate a great environment when we're able to properly plan, and when we're making decisions willy-nilly, the process by which we can fiscally and educationally plan for our future goes away. So I think that's the uncertainty is where we're at, and certainly ESSER dollars. Again, I mean our state just finished out a CLSD grant as well to support early literacy. And I know that there are a couple states around me that just got those grants, but I worry about the future of those as well. And I know many states across the country have been able to use those to good effect and take their literacy instruction from where it was to a spot where we're ready to go forward. But states that have not had that opportunity need to get there, right? We need to make sure that it's a level playing field for all. And federal dollars are so often that. They are what levels the playing field for all students.
Well said. Thank you so much. Again, I just want to thank our panel for today. The insights that you all provided were just so exceptional. And thank you for being on the front lines, particularly our superintendent and our parent leader. The work that you all do every day is tremendously appreciated. We appreciate you all. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Paige, who will wrap us up with some closing announcements. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Fiade. Thank you all for engaging in this conversation with our panel. To learn more, I encourage you to explore CAP's Back to School series and stay tuned for a new report coming next week discussing 4 federal actions to watch in the 2025-2026 school year. I want to again thank our panelists for joining us to share their expertise and providing us with actions state and local leaders can take to support students, educators, and families as public schools face federal cuts. To our audience, thank you all for joining us today for this important conversation. We hope to see you again at future CAP events. As a reminder, a recording of this event will be available at americanprogress.org/events, where you can register for all of CAP's upcoming events and watch recordings of our previous events. Thank you for your participation and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.